I was born and raised in England in the countryside, near Stonehenge in the New Forest, so a very kind of old school, sort of enchanted, ancient place. And then moved to the United States. My father was in the Royal Navy, so it was a sort of a NATO kind of exchange thing. And then suddenly got dropped down in very different American culture. And I was sort of always, a bit of an outsider looking in. What are these strange customs that happen? Why doesn't any of this feel like mine, or feel that I can truly become an immersive participant? I'm always stuck behind a plate glass window. So that kind of carried into undergrad. I had a great couple of professors that were really interested in what at the time was called ethnohistory, but it's basically historical anthropology. And the place that I did tap in was American action sports, so like the beautiful continent, big nature, North America at its finest. And that just became our life and our adventure, and went into grad school basically trying to answer the question of where did we go wrong? Where did modern contemporary civilization and society go off the rails? Because if on the one hand, there's this sense of being alive and home in the garden, in beautiful nature, surrounded with good people, treating each other well, this kind of stuff, like why on earth isn't there more of that? Why isn't this how we do it every day? And so I was going to go the whole PhD route. I just thought all I had to do was get my PhD, and then I would be given a wood-paneled office, and I could smoke a pipe and have elbow patches, and I could just think thinky thoughts for the rest of my life and write about it occasionally. But in between, mountain guide and kind of outdoor educator, and I realized I was like, oh, I would rather go out and live these experiences than be in the basement of a library analyzing them. So that was kind of my break from my original path of kind of thinker, academic scholar. So then, lived at 10,000 feet, had our child born there. It snowed in June, when he was born. And my goal was always like, I can't make sense of existing civilization. It doesn't pencil out to me. I don't understand why it is the way it is and why people do what they do. So I'm going to abstract myself. And the only places that felt understandable to me were, great books and learning and big, beautiful nature, far up in the hills, and basically adventure and explore and then think and write. And once we had our children, we were sort of in this goofy situation where it was like, and I read a sentence, I don't remember who said it, but it was basically the poverty of being poor can often remove much of the dignity of being poor, right? Because we had chosen an incredibly low impact lifestyle. And we were like, we don't need all the consumer things. We don't want them. But I think we're going to unfairly hamper or limit our children's life if they have to come up in a little bubble that is so completely other than anything else they're going to engage in the world. So we literally kind of came down the mountain and built a Montessori school for our kids and really did the kind of back in the flats thing, which was profoundly uncomfortable for me. I felt like my life had ended. It was probably the lowest point in my life, was that transition. Because I still felt like, oh, there's this beautiful thing that we've seen and lived and experienced, and I am failing to live up to it. It was a sense of being torn apart from what I knew to be true and life as we could live it at our best. But because of our experience like mountain guiding in Nepal and Tibet and the Rockies and the Sierras and all this kind of stuff, I ended up getting recruited by a management consulting firm that was super progressive. They had Zen monks, martial artists, Navy SEALs. They took CEOs to the Esalen Institute. They had all sorts of very innovative things, and they were on the cutting edge of the conscious capitalism movement, which was how to bring the doing well by doing good. And for a moment, I was like, well, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I was a little too much of a strident idealist. Maybe there are ways, to kind of balance this thing and actually use the free market to do social good. And I spent about 6 or 7 years kind of sincerely trying to help CEOs and founders turn their organizations into platforms for social change and positive good. And kind of over time sort of realized, at least for me, it just didn't seem like it was going anywhere. And it really seemed that at the end of all the proverbial days, CEOs and leaders, they wanted new skills, they wanted to elevate their consciousness, they wanted to become better and more resourceful because they wanted a better relationship with their spouse and their children. But virtually none of them were going to turn off the golden goose machine of selling whatever widgets they sold to alter the impact of their commercial enterprises at all. And the turning point for me was a young president's organization member had gone to the Amazon with his 2 teenage sons as part of the Pachamama Alliance, which is for rainforest conservation. And they'd got to travel up rivers in rinky-dinky boats all the way up to a relatively intact tribe, have an ayahuasca ceremony, and then be asked, hey, you've just had this deep dive, you've just experienced our initiatory magical experience, will you help us protect and preserve? And for $250,000, you can preserve something like 100 hectares of land, like a meaningful thing. And this fellow went back to his CEO group and he had this dilemma. I'm really torn. On the one hand, I've just had this experience. I've just had this experience with my sons. It was profound. It was moving. It was all these things. And on the other hand, I've got the brand new Ferrari Italia on pre-order. And ever since I was a little boy, I've always dreamed of owning a Ferrari. And I don't know what to do. And to a person, his group said, dude, you've deserved the Ferrari. Which then sat in his garage, virtually undriven, for 4 years before he ended up selling it before it depreciated any further. And you're just like, okay. That's when I pretty much gave up on attempting to steer the ship of the market, the ship of commercial interests in any particularly different direction, and started basically I just didn't want to put my energy there anymore. And so that became a return to more the sort of neuroanthropology. What's going on? Why do we do the things we do? And can we learn from those things? And can we help start architecting better culture for the road ahead? That is getting increasingly intense and relevant. There are a lot of movements that are just trying to wrestle with, is there something salvageable? Or are we into the, hashtag burn it all down phase, where we reject any continuity? Just, evolution, revolution, it's that basic question. And historically, it's always been both. So I don't have an answer. But if you kind of wake up into the human experience and you're sort of like, wait a second, I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose to be born. This world seems bizarre, harsh, wildly unfair, scary, just stacked decks, like things that don't seem like I've got a fair chance. And that's really true for an overwhelming majority of humans. I mean, for sure, there's a bourgeois little, choose my own lifestyle. I'm globally nomadic and technologically informed, and I get to go to all the fun hotspots. There's that little tiny subset. But in general, most folks don't have a whole lot of choice as to the arc of their life and the big tides and the big currents that sweep them along. And if you feel like, well, what do? I go and get educated, I go and get a job. What do I do with my money? I spend more of it on housing, and then I have to buy shit because my life is kind of shitty and unmeaningful without the things. Whatever the next rung on the ladder is, this sucks here, so I'm obliged to try and get to the next rung and see if it's any better up here. And then you have kids, and your kids go away, and you're like, oh my gosh, the burned out husk of myself where I gave everything to my children, and now I've got nothing left as I get old enough just to realize my own mortality and a slow slide to the grave. What's the point? I think is a legit inquiry, because it does seem kind of weird. So like Camus just kind of went to the end of that inquiry and he said, look, any thinking person would say this is a shell game, but I think it's really important to have that tragic inquiry, which is to actually go into the tragic and be like, okay, what would get me out of bed? What would inspire me or inform me to the point where I had a sense of purpose that's deeper than that, that's more durable than that? And for me, I kind of ended up with 3 things that sort of get me out of bed on the morning when I've been asking that question, Camus' inquiry, like, what's the fucking point? And if I feel especially like there isn't much of a point, it's seek novelty, make art, and help out. So if I feel like life is pointless, the first question is, have I been seeking enough novelty? Have I been in nature? Have I experienced a new culture or community or bioregion? Have I learned something new? Have I literally, because we are hardwired for novelty, and dopamine gets all sorts of pop psych coverage, but it's not just a pleasure neurochemical, it's a salience neurochemical. Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, he calls the idea that you'll get 1 shot of dopamine for being rewarded for finding a berry or finding a fruit, but you'll get 4 times that amount of dopamine when sometimes you do, and then sometimes you don't, and then you do again. The magic of maybe, the uncertainty, and then the reward is actually off the charts, more rewarding. So in my life, if it's feeling flat, repetitive, Groundhog Day, then I check seeking novelty. And then the next is making art. And I don't just mean like painting paintings. It means anything that is more good, more true, more beautiful. Anything that rails against the second law of thermodynamics of entropy and decay over time. And it could be planting a flower garden, it could be writing a poem, it could be building a company, it could be whatever it is, but it is, I am going to assemble matter into coherence, even just slightly, as a testament. And the final one of help out is, if I can figure out how to do those first two, then share that, and especially share it with people that are struggling to figure out those two. And to me, it might seem weird or underwhelming, like those three things, but strangely, those save me repeatedly from the screaming abyss, from the descent into nihilism. It's like, okay, we're here. So what can we do? What ought we do to make the most of that? We talked about immersing ourselves in the tragic, right? And then standing back up with a reason for being that actually is more durable. It doesn't mean I've bypassed it, fixed it, or solved it. It means I am in it. And I stand up again anyway. Ryan Holiday wrote a book that got a lot of traction called The Obstacle is the Way. So what I would propose is the Aikido idea, which is don't plan on never falling. Because then when you get clipped, you're going to be absolutely out of luck. Instead, practice falling. Be like, falling's a part of life. Falling is a part of this art, whatever this is of being human. So I'm going to actually train it. And that's not a bad thing. That actually becomes a really fun thing. That becomes an empowering thing. I actually learn how to fall without hurting myself. I learn how to fall and get back up again. I learn how to remain centered even when I'm falling. And those aren't normal. Those aren't intuitive, right? We fall forwards and we brace ourselves badly and we break. So if we just spend all of our time on the gritty here and now, the mundane will crush us. That's the Albert Camus part. Like, what's the point? This sucks and I don't see any end to it. But on the other hand, if we say this sucks and I'm going to seek the transcendent, right? If we only seek the transcendent or the sacred, it will burn us. It's literally like Raiders of the Lost Ark, staring at the Ark of the Covenant. Like it'll melt us. And anybody that you know who has been excessively into potent psychedelics, potent meditation, potent neo-tantra sexuality, any of those things, they often get soft in the head or cross-eyed. They start losing their ability to translate between worlds. That's the magic and the tragic. And when you're like, wait a second, how can it be both? How can I have had that experience on the mountaintop, that experience of that concert, that experience of true love, whatever that beautiful, timeless moment was, how can I have that and then Monday morning is just as shitty or shittier than ever? And not just for me in my life, but in the streets, around the world, like there's a whole lot of pain and suffering. How do we reconcile that? And if anybody is still on the verge of like, oh, I put my post-it notes and I get up at 5 a.m. and I do my fucking workout and I'm owning it, I'm hustling, I'm grinding. It's like, yeah, just wait. Have you had kids? Have you buried your parents? Have you experienced illness, setback, injury, divorce, depression, despair? Just wait, because like life comes for all of us. There's that Ernest Hemingway quote along those lines. He says, the world breaks everyone. Only some of us are stronger in the broken places. That's the whole notion of a bone being stronger where it's broken. But then the final line he says, which is the kicker, I think, he says, and those that does not break, it kills. So reconciling this human condition and finding reasons to keep on keeping on. Like if you just do it from the mundane, you'll just get pile drived into the dirt. So every single hit just slams you further into the ground until it's your grave. But having peak experiences where we get to renew, remember, refresh, those are essential. And then grounding that and sharing that is, I think, a non-negotiable and essential buffer. It's a way to dump a lot of that existential grief and confusion and suffering into the collective. And then also like intergenerational songs, scriptures that tell us ways through it. that highlight beautiful twists or outcomes or hopeful best possibilities. And we remember, I'm not the first one to wonder these things. I'm not the first one to experience loss and longing and yearning. In fact, here's this amazing song, and we're all dancing to it right now. And this song was written, I think, centuries ago, but it's actually speaking to my lived experience, this moment, right here, right now. And suddenly, like, the tragedy of my life, of the human experience, hasn't changed, but my relationship to it has shifted fundamentally. So that would be my sense, is like, how do we learn to fall and get back up again? How do we learn to remember what we've forgotten? And how do we learn how to connect with our brothers and sisters? And if we can do that, it doesn't get us off the hook. It's not, if you do that, then you levitate and you get your Willy Wonka golden ticket and you never have to go back. It's no. We all have to go back. You actually come back home and you're like, okay, this is it. Like, this is the full catastrophe. And I have however many decades I have left after that realization to actually show up fully for this human experience. If you're in sort of rudimentary martial arts, you learn a lot of katas or forms, like punch, kick. It's very scripted. But you can make the mistake of thinking you actually know martial arts, right? When you've just gone through all of those robot-like procedures. But his point was, life happens to us first. You get smacked across the head in the bar, and you're like, whoa, what just happened? I just got cold cocked. I'm not ready, set, punch me. The same way, the same time we've been practicing, right? And that's life. Life happens to us, knocks us off balance. And then the question is how quickly can we get back to form, to an efficient, elegant, powerful response? Not, I'm ready, life, come at me. Because life is generally kind of just, it's a running clock from the moment we even realize we're on the field. So basically, how do I learn to fall and get back up again? You can make a case that that's generally a nice combination of access to peak states and healing. So ecstasis is the peak state, catharsis is the healing part. It ranges from micro to macro, from the little bitty things I do day to day that just kind of help me. It's almost like a squeegee, on a plate of glass. Like, it helps me just kind of get all the gunge off my day to day. You could call that micro PTSD. Like, how do I avoid accumulating little bits and pieces that over time really jack me up? So do the obvious is what we would just basically say about the micro, which is sleep more, move often, get outside, make love, grieve fully, be grateful, eat real food, mostly plants, not too much. And you can add to that functional movement, attention training or meditation practice, any form of breath work that just basically seeks to soothe, center, down, regulate my nervous system in general, because most of us are a little overstressed. We're a little overstimulated right now. So in general, those would be the good things. So you've got your daily, how do I deal with my micro PTSD? Now, on the macro level, what do I do once a week for half a day? What do I do once a month for a full day? What do I do once a season for a whole weekend? And annually, what is like a week that I just dedicate to deep dive, renewal, and reset? You get to put the right practices in the right frequency so that you're not over or under cooking. Typically, a lot of people are stuck in the day-to-day. Then they have a brief access to an ecstatic experience. They go to a festival, they go to some deep retreat or, breathwork workshop or meditation workshop or whatever it would be. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then they just mainline it. They just go seeking it and they just go bip-bopping around for months to years, chasing the next bigger, better state. And that usually doesn't work out very well. And they usually are seeking way more information and novelty than they're engaging in integration and application. And then quite often things start breaking down in their life. They might have impacts to their career, to their relationships, to their finances, to whatever it would be. Things get a little woolly. Or they become guilty, they become unsure. They're like, oh no, I just got to quit all that. That stuff's bad. And then they just turn it off. And so now, bam, they're back down to the mundane, but it's even worse because they've now seen what else is possible. And that's usually a really brutal come down. So the notion of daily, weekly, monthly to annual practices is, can you get that momentum going, right? Where you have repeat incrementally increasing access to peak states, plus you're raising the stage of your baseline with your daily solid practices. So you're getting stronger and you're getting more able to hold more light. And at the same time, you're going back up to the mountaintop, just a regular enough basis to just high enough up the mountain that you're remembering, yep, when I'm down there in the forest, I'm not lost, I'm not wandering around. I actually know where I'm going because I've seen it from above, but I still have to go back down and put on my pack and keep walking. And if you can do that, you can juxtapose that, then you have a chance to stay centered. In the Taoist thing, it's called, there's even a posture. It's like one hand up to the sky and one hand down to the ground. It's called heaven and earth. And then you can start living from a place where you're like, actually, I kind of keep remembering my deepest self-commitment direction. And I show up with the ability to get hammered in the complexities of the day-to-day. So like on the far extreme, a week deep dive could be this is longer than a week, but go to a 10-day silent darkness Vipassana retreat. Guaranteed to blow your mind and knock your socks off. You could do an ultra marathon or adventure race, 100 miles up in the mountains. You will peel through layers of yourself. You will peel through layers of your motivation, your drive, your tolerance for adversity and suffering, all of those kind of things. You could go to a festival and experience tons of music and activations and speeches and talks and be overwhelmed with a community you might not know you felt like you had a part of. You could engage in a psychedelic experience. I mean, a number of deep dive experiences do involve, like if we want to talk now about a true death rebirth experience, because there is a sense that, back to this idea of like, can we manage the tragic? Did any of us ask to be born the first time? Most of us resent or resist some expression of that. My parents just had me. I didn't sign up for this. And as a result, we're almost always kind of not fully committed. We want out. So a death rebirth ritual gives us the chance to die before you die. Like that's the secret of the mystery traditions. Goethe said, "He who doesn't know the secret, die and become, remains forever a stranger on this earth." And so you can almost say that like us being firstborn humans, the ones that didn't choose this and are trying to escape it and bypass it, we're almost all cosmic orphans. Like we feel we got kicked out of the womb, we got booted from the mother, this is all weirder and harder than we thought, and we're trying to get back to that, where we feel safe and warm and cozy and everything's groovy. But death rebirth practices give us a chance to actually value and appreciate life. I understand the suffering of the world, and I'm not trying to duck it or get around it. I bear witness to it in my own life and in everyone's. The short answer is hell no, we absolutely don't. And access to transcendence has broadly, I mean not exclusively, but broadly has defaulted to people of privilege. You can go back to the 1920s and the lost generation of American expats that went to Paris and kicked it and hung out, to the 1960s, to the current kind of psychedelic renaissance, Burning Man. Like this is basically just what wealthy people of privilege do with their free time. And so that's on the substrate of a whole lot of social, political, and economic privilege. But on the other hand, the opposite is also true. So if you look at the Kurds, if you look at the Roma, right, the gypsies of Europe, if you look at the Ashkenazi Jews with the Jewish diaspora, you look at Native Americans, you look at Aboriginal traditions, there are an accumulated cultures of historically dispossessed and displaced peoples. And often they have powerful traditions of grieving and renewal and reaffirmation of who they are as a people that clearly has passed the test of time. And why the part that is your little lifetime, how it lives in this longer story of our people. So even if your life isn't necessarily working out, you're doing this in gratitude for your ancestors that got you this far and even gave you a shot. And you're doing this on behalf of your children and their children, so that even if I don't get to the promised land, I'm just going to put every last breath of mine getting a little closer so they don't have as far to go. Those communities exist and persist in large part because they have stories that exist and persist. And absolutely, there has to be political, economic, legislative, social change. There has to be, it's all the things. So my sense would be is that any effective movement right now has to be multivariable. if you just pursue legislation without a deep spiritual or cultural, North Star, it will likely just get lost in lobbying and watered down shit and, and all the things that, defunct politics tends to do. And if it's just a spiritual movement with no gearing into the world, then we typically just get more and more ascendant and isolated in the varying monasteries of our belief. And quite often those end up escapist, because the harder it gets down in the real world, the more tempting it is to believe, well, you know what? I don't think this world actually pencils out. So we're going to start investing in the next world. But unless we commit to something along the lines of all of us or none of us, we're not going to shrink the pie, we're not going to crank up the drawbridges, we're going to say every human on this earth right now deserves a fair shot at the good life. This planet, these bodies, this lifetime. We're not going to put it all on Mars and space colonies. We're actually going to try and fix the place we're from. These bodies, we're not going to try and upload, create our own matrix and upload ourselves to the singularity. And this lifetime, we're not going to try and chase life extension for a fortunate few while millions of people are committing suicide and millions more are dying through harsh conditions. We're going to take a stand on principle before we then get to any of the real-time decisions over the next 10 to 50 years. So what are the stakes? What's actually going on right now? Because if we look at the news feeds and you see culture wars and you see the rise of populism in Europe and the United States and all these kinds of things, and social justice on one hand and alt-right on the other and those kind of things, it's very easy to think that's the battle. But I think there's actually, if you pop up one level above it, there's actually a very different conflict, far more crucial, which is the battle between tribalism and humanism. And James Carse wrote the book Finite and Infinite Games. That's a simple way to think of it, but finite games are win-lose, up, down, and the goal was to win and end the game and get the winnings. So that's all of politics, history, sexuality, business, you name it. There's an awful lot of finite games, winners and losers. And the infinite game is win-win, and the point isn't to win or end the game, the point is to expand the game, continue the game, and invite as many people to play as possible. But as we're at this edge of late-stage capitalism, overconsumption, and increasing political unrest, there's a lot of folks that are like, oh, blow up what's being called, not inaccurately, but neoliberalism. That's been a shell game, it was unfair, it was a lie. And all that happened is the 0.1% got incredibly rich. I mean, here's an example of that. I started writing this book 18 months ago and wrote a sentence that said when 68 people who could all fit on the bus, not that they'd ever ride one, own as much as the bottom half of the world, we're in a weird spot. And just before going to print, went back and fact-checked, and I had to change it from 68 to 26. They could fit in a stretch limo together now. And you're just like, that's insane. Nowhere in nature does any other organism hoard or aggregate that much asymmetrical resource or energy. So on that hand, you're totally get the burn it all down thing. But somewhere in the midst of the articulation of capitalism, the articulation of nation states and democracy, and all the things that came out of the French Enlightenment, the American experiment, was this infinite game of all men and women are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, regardless of race, color, or creed. Now, there's all sorts of frustrated, pissed off, and bitter folks that saying that was a lie. But the question is, was it a lie, or was it a noble, fragile experiment that has never been fully attempted or satisfactorily executed, but the idea is still one of the best ideas we've ever had? And this is not as propaganda to keep the have-nots quiet and in line, patiently waiting for their turn, which never fucking comes, right? And late-stage capitalism and the myth of a free market, I would say the simplest rallying cry of a both and is free the market. The market's nowhere near free. It's not even close to free. It's never been free. So all of the lip service about the power of entrepreneurship and the power, the invisible hand and all this wonderful genius shit, we've never even tried that. We've had insane rent seeking by incumbent powers. We've had lobbying, the perversion of the democratic process. We've had the tragedy of the commons. So like, fix the tragedy of the commons and fix rent-seeking behaviors by those who are advantaged and in power, and actually truly create a free, low-regulation market where new ideas and access to innovation and invention can happen across humanity, would be one of the most amazing things ever. So there's that sense, is like, out of this rotting carcass of the modern experiment, can we go inside, hold our breath, hold our noses, and pull out this tender, fragile thing of the infinite game and say, this we should not lose, this we should not burn down. I mean, if you look at Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, battlefield, one of the bloodiest conflicts, violence, and he doesn't do what was expected of him, which was a normal eulogy. He says, no, 7 years ago, our forefathers set foot on this continent to do a thing. Remember the thing? The thing was really important. We need to get back to the thing. In the midst of carnage, MLK in his I Have a Dream speech didn't say, hey, you racist white fuck, stop lynching my people. He says, I have a dream. I refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. And so there had been these moments where in times of crisis, we double down on that commitment to the infinite game. So do I think that we can avoid a hard landing in the next decade or so? Increasingly, no. It just seems like if you take everything that's going on right now, as far as both climactic, ecological, human challenges, if this was our dress rehearsal, if this was our sort of early warning, I would say we get failing marks. So I think we're out of time, friends. And the really sad reality that I think we need to wrap our heads around was actually shared with me by a friend and colleague, Zach Stein, who's a Harvard-trained psychologist. And he said, we are perhaps entering an era where billions watch while millions die. This is actually happening, and it's real for an increasingly large swath of humanity. But the one thing I would say is super duper pathological is that we glimpse that. You know, we feel it for a minute, a day, a month, and then somebody introduces this way out, which is, well, maybe Mother Gaia is going to be teaching us a lesson. Maybe we have too many people on this planet. Maybe not everyone's going to make it. Maybe only the healthy, vibrant, awake, spiritually conscious fill in the blank of who we get to be. But maybe there's an evolutionary keyhole event. Maybe not everybody makes it through the keyhole, but the ones that do are going to be populating a new Earth. And you see that get smuggled into all sorts of otherwise cotton candy and fluffy New Age or psychedelic communities and religious communities. And that sense of like, oh shit, we don't have to solve this? Wait, this is already destined, or this is just the way it is, or the way it needs to be? And we get to decouple our care and concern for fellow humanity, because some of you guys are already dead men walking, but not me, right? I've got a golden ticket to the other side. And that is so seductive and so pernicious and so ultimately abhorrent. That's what I meant about a priori decisions, because if you get down this road, you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna move because I can afford to move, and I'm gonna go someplace that's better and safer because I can. And I think, you know, if you're stuck in any of those if-then decisions, once you get started, you're going to choose save my hide, save life and limb, versus the ahead of time, here's the stake in the ground. We're for all humans. And so it's time to get super duper real for all of us. There's a book called Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez, and it's a fascinating story. Who lives, who dies, and why in crises, everything from plane crashes to, you know, forest fires and various things. And he kind of distills out some of the qualities of the survivors. And one of the first things is that they assessed that things were critical sooner than everyone else. So as rapidly as possible, disabusing ourselves of our polite fictions and getting ruthlessly aware of the required actions, and then acting, doing stuff, talking about it more, hearing more clever people map and model existential risk and permutations. We're getting very close to the end where any of that's useful. In fact, I would say we're already past it. All you need is enough to say, what do I think is likely to happen? What are the responses that are in my control to mitigate damage so that I can be one of the people helping and not someone needing rescue? And so I end the book with something that my editor did not want me to end the book with, which was, we could do all these things. We could learn to reconnect to our inspiration. We can learn to heal. We can find, each other. We can do all these groovy things. We can even avoid cultic tendencies and rapture ideologies. We can dodge all these bullets, and then we get to a happy outcome. And the only honest answer that I could see from here is to say, maybe not. There may be too much inertia, too much momentum in this system, that even if we became saints tomorrow, there's a hangover that is coming, and it will take decades to move through our ecosystems and our social systems. So we're in for a world of hurt no matter what we do tomorrow, and it doesn't seem like we're getting ready to do anything profound or spectacular tomorrow. In fact, it seems like we're actively sabotaging our best efforts. So let's end with the notion of radical hope, which is to say this could all come undone. The good times as we knew them are never coming back. Now what? It is a rooted belief in some fundamentally good outcome that we cannot see from here. And that's the key point, that we cannot see from here, that we commit to anyway. And so when I was speaking about the dispossessed people, the Kurds, the Roma, the Jews, etc., and their capacity to hold radical hope, in some respects, it is going from a fragmented, rational individual consumer, like I want mine and I want it today, because that's how I've been trained and conditioned my entire life. And if I don't get what I want today, I'm pissed, right? Which is very tiny, little fragile little worldview, to expanding that to like, oh, we have walk-on parts in the war. We're going to unlock the keys to our cage with the key that also happens to be the key to the kingdom, right? We can experience the highest heights. We can experience a deep and profound understanding of the nature of consciousness and reality. And we can commit to the longer arc of humanity. We're just playing a chapter or maybe a paragraph in a much longer passion play, but we're doing it on behalf of everyone born and not yet born. And that both valorizes, it lends some courage and some dignity and some gravitas to what we're doing. It also buffers us from the disappointments and frustrations and setbacks of my life in my lifetime, where I thought everything was coming to me, and gives us the kind of endurance and the kind of perspective to deal with all sorts of gnarly setbacks. Because if you think about gratitude for our parents, right, or our grandparents, you could be like, oh, my dad was repressed and locked down and he worked too much, and my mom was subservient, or my grandparents were this and that. And you're like, you know what? They got it. They got the light, the spark of our family lineage to me. And if I've been fortunate enough to coax that into a bonfire, into a burning blaze of life and possibility and insight and inspiration, then do I really get to look back and be bitter or second guess them that they had to carry, they just gave me a little ember and it wasn't that much, but it was still alive. They carried it through storms and snow and poverty and whatever. They got it to me. The spark persisted. And so that's radical hope. Radical hope is the thing that mobilizes us in spite of the hardships and setbacks. And so thank you, ancestors. I did not walk a mile in your shoes. I have no fucking idea how hard it was to get life and possibility to me. And I'm sure as hell not going to be stingy in my appreciation. The same thing looking forwards in time. If my goal is just preserve the ember, it might be wrapped in moss, it might be in a bullhorn, like just here, and take it another generation, take it another lap, and we will get there.